Hey girl, welcome to Rooted Radiance, the women's health podcast dedicated to helping you improve your health, grow, and radiate with confidence. So many of us grew up believing our period was an inconvenience, a burden, or something to push through. But your menstrual cycle is a powerful indicator of your health, a vital sign, just like your heart rate, your blood pressure, or your temperature. Today, I want to help you see that your cycle isn't something to hate, but it's something that gives you insight, clarity, and connection to your body. So today we're going to be diving into the menstrual cycle, what your period is, the phases of the cycle, your hormones, energy, and mood changes, and then part of my own experience as well. Before I continue, I was sick this last week, so my voice is almost all the way back. I lost it. Bear with me on that. Before I dive into the menstrual cycle, I think it's important to start with how women were just not taught much about our cycles and like why we tend to kind of learn to hate our cycle. In brainstorming and thinking about this podcast episode, I thought back to my own experience when I was young. And like I said, most young girls are not taught about their cycle except a small tidbit in like sex ed class where they talk to you about bleeding, and that's pretty much it. And then thinking about this, what's crazy is more often than not, adolescent girls are just put on birth control if there is some initial irregularity without proper education on what birth control is and how it impacts your body. And I was one of them. A birth control bleed is not a real period. It's just a withdrawal bleed. I think honestly, I'll probably do a part 2 to this episode, especially if this resonates with you, because there's a lot to dive into on birth control, and I don't think I'll be able to fit it in this episode. But I believe it's important to understand your body as a woman, and I really hope that you find this helpful and empowering. So let's kind of first talk about why your cycle is a vital sign. Your cycle is a reflection of your hormonal health, your stress levels, nutritional status, thyroid function, and overall well-being. And I had no idea of this when I was younger. The human body is just simply amazing and intricately complex. Like, I love how God designed our bodies. Your body communicates with you, and your cycle is one of those ways that it communicates with you as a woman. So irregular cycles, heavy bleeding, very painful periods, or missing periods are not normal. They are signals from your body telling you that something is up. And this is exactly what I discuss with my clients, which has been a complete breakthrough moment for them to really understand those signals in their body and working to improve their menstrual cycle health. Those signals are feedback. Your body is essentially saying, hey, here's how I'm doing. And when you learn to read it and understand it, you can stop feeling betrayed by your body for having a period and instead feel supported. As I alluded to earlier, so many women grow up believing their period is something to dread, hide, or push through. And that's not your fault. I feel as women, we were conditioned from a young age to see our cycle as an inconvenience instead of this vital sign that it actually is. When I was thinking about this, I thought about a few reasons why women learn to hate their period. The first is we were kind of told and taught to hide it or push through it. Like, do you remember whispering for a tampon in middle or high school, or felt embarrassed if you leaked, you had like an accident? Or maybe you remember being labeled as emotional on your period, or heard it must be that time of the month from a man. That always cut deep and can make you feel shamed about your period and make you want to hide it and your emotions just to push through. So I feel like we really learned that it's something to hide, taboo, or it's just shameful. And I used to feel like that, especially when I was an adolescent. The second reason I think that we were taught to kind of hate our period is that we were taught that our symptoms were normal, but they weren't. Like the type of symptoms that you had cramps all day that took you out for your workday or during school, mood swings that just made you feel uncontrollable and almost crazy, having heavy bleeding where you feel like you can't go out of the house for more than a couple hours, or just doctors brushing it off because it's just part of being a woman or suggesting birth control to manage it. And so I feel like when the symptoms are very severe and we're told that that's normal when they're not, and when your concerns are really dismissed, I feel like we just start to believe our body is working against us. And again, that like cycles back into us resenting our period, hating our period, that sort of thing. And then the third reason is just the fact, again, that we weren't taught about our cycle. And if we're not taught about different phases of our cycle, how our hormones shift and what our hormones are, and if we were never taught how to support our body in each phase of our cycle, it's easy to resent it because you don't fully understand it. And then lastly, I think when a lot of women think about their cycle, they just focus on the bleeding menstruation part of it, not the entire cycle. Your bleeding is part of your cycle, but your cycle is a month of these hormonal changes and rhythms that affect like your energy, your mood, metabolism, libido, creativity, and confidence. So when you only focus on the hardest part, the frustrating menstruation part of it, of course it feels negative and of course you resent it. So I'm going to dive into the cycle phases and some of the hormones now. And I'm going to challenge you as you hear this to start seeing your cycle for what it truly is. It is a powerful, intelligent, built-in vital sign for your health. So the first part of your cycle is called the follicular phase. The follicular phase lasts about 14 days in total. And this is kind of based off of like the average cycle for women is roughly 28 days. So this can definitely vary depending on the length of your cycle. Usually a cycle is anywhere from 28 to 35, can still be considered normal. If it's outside of those bounds, it's beginning to be abnormal and needs to be looked at further. So the follicular phase actually begins when you menstruate. So that's day one. So when you're actually bleeding, that is day one of your cycle. A lot of women think that your cycle is your bleeding is at the end, and that's not the case. Bleeding typically lasts around 5 days for most women. Menstruation is really important because you are shedding your uterine lining that was built up because you didn't get pregnant. So during this follicular phase, FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, starts to increase here. And that is because of your pituitary gland in your brain. And FSH is the key to initiate your ovarian follicle growth. And that rise in FSH stimulates your ovaries to mature your eggs. And the most dominant hormone in this follicular phase is estrogen. Estrogen helps with our bone health, our heart health, reproductive development, endometrial lining, and so much more. So estrogen, though it gets a bad rap, is actually a really important hormone for us women. And in this phase, in the follicular phase, estrogen is at its highest in this phase of our cycle. It will increase later on, which we'll talk about, but not as high as it is here in the follicular phase. Okay, the second part of your cycle is ovulation. So that happens pretty much in the midpoint of your cycle, and it happens right before that third kind of phase of your cycle, which we'll get into. Luteinizing hormone, or LH, triggers ovulation in a response from the rush of estrogen that just happened in the follicular phase. So estrogen will start declining after. LH, just like FSH, is released by your pituitary gland, and it works very closely with FSH. LH typically will surge to help with ovulation and eventually the production of progesterone. I often will use basal body temperature checks and possibly at-home urine stick tests to see if there's an LH surge or a temperature change when my clients, are having irregularities with their period or want to learn more about their period, or if they're trying to get pregnant or avoid pregnancy. Those are some tools that we use together to really assess that. You can only get pregnant when you ovulate. So if you figure out that day or the timing of that, you can really optimize the timing of sex to get pregnant or avoid pregnancy. And this is extremely important, whether you're trying to have a child or not. If you're intentionally not trying to have a child, using protection towards the end of your follicular cycle, leading into the luteal phase, so right through follicular ovulation into luteal, can be really helpful. because ovulation, there's like this 5 to 7 day kind of window of when ovulation may occur where you're fertile. And if you're not using BBT or urine tests to track it, it can be really difficult to assess what that is or when that occurs. If you're not using basal body temperature or urine stick tests to track it, it's really hard to determine where your fertile ovulation window is. Once you have ovulation, your egg has to be fertilized in 24 hours in order to have a child. The tricky part about this is that sperm can actually live for about 5 days inside of you. So even if your egg wasn't released yet, if you did have sex and that sperm survived in there, it can technically last for 5 days and technically be able to fertilize that egg if it came after the fact. So again, there's this 5 to 7 day window where you could get pregnant. This is your most fertile window. So if you're trying to have a child or avoid having a child, you just need to know this. And it's important, again, to look at BBT and the LH surges if it's related to wanting to get pregnant and if you just want a deeper understanding of your cycle and what's happening. So during ovulation, this is where testosterone is at its highest for us. Testosterone is an anabolic hormone similarly to estrogen. Our body does not produce significant amounts of testosterone, but it does produce testosterone in much smaller quantities than males. So testosterone rises during ovulation and helps to increase our libido. And it's so fascinating to me how our bodies work. Our bodies naturally have this increase in libido around ovulation to procreate. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but sex can feel different at different times in your cycle. And that's actually due to the cervix positioning. So during this ovulation time, your cervix actually moves to a higher position, which actually allows for a deeper penetration. And again, I'm super fascinated just by how our bodies were designed and how this leads to ovulation time, higher libido and sex, the cervix positioning, all to help us to procreate. So it's just super fascinating to me just how we were designed and the intricacy level of it. So while we do produce testosterone, again, it's in much smaller quantities than men. And so if we have too much testosterone, that can actually lead to an imbalance in our hormones. High testosterone is pretty common in women with PCOS or those who use anabolic steroids. Testosterone supports our lean muscle mass and our bone health. And as I mentioned, it also helps with libido as well. So typically, if I have a patient that has cycle irregularities, we can take a deeper look at their hormones. And if I have a patient with PCOS, I always want to see recent lab work so I can see everything on the hormone panel, what their A1C looks like, etc., just to really get an understanding. And then we will typically use cycle tracking with that. So ovulation typically occurs around day 14. It might be days 12 to 16, just depending on the length of your cycle, because every woman's cycle is a little bit different. When you ovulate, you might actually feel pain in your lower abdominal region, and that's called Mittelschmerz. It's a fun little name to say, Mittelschmerz. It's estimated about 40% of women actually experience it. And when that happens, the Mittelschmerz, that is when your egg is actually moving out of your ovary. It's super fascinating how some of us can really feel this, and you only will feel it on one side of your body. Sometimes I feel that women think that they're starting to get their period because they're experiencing these cramps, but it's not. Menstruation is about to come again. This is simply the ovulation that's occurring, and it should change. So typically you'll experience it on one side and then another side, etc. Again, only 40% of women experience this. So you might or you might not, just depends. I personally do experience this. And so I can tell when I'm like, oh, I ovulated, because I can feel that kind of like, it feels like a cramp, but it's just on one side of your body. So in ovulation, your egg moves. And if your egg is fertilized by sperm, then you will not bleed in about 14 days. Okay, if you don't get pregnant, then you start bleeding again. So this is just the rhythm of your cycle, what happens, what to expect. And then after ovulation comes the third phase of your cycle, which is luteal phase. The luteal phase is around day 15 to 28. The dominant hormone in the luteal phase is progesterone. So the corpus luteum will start to secrete progesterone. Progesterone helps to thicken the lining to support pregnancy. Progesterone also supports sleep, really calms your body down, and it stimulates your thyroid. Estrogen in the luteal phase will rise again, but not as high as it was in the follicular phase. In the last week of your cycle, you may start to experience premenstrual syndrome, PMS symptoms, and that can last upwards from that last week into about day 3 of your cycle. So into the 3rd day of your bleeding. It just varies for every single woman, but your symptoms should subside before you're done bleeding. So PMS symptoms vary greatly. Again, different women experience different PMS symptoms and severity of symptoms. So some symptoms could include acne, breast tenderness, bloating and water retention, headaches or migraines, bowel changes, fatigue, cravings, and mood swings. The hormonal changes here oftentimes can lead to bloating and water retention. And it occurs for a lot of women, and you may not really feel your best during this part of your cycle. Usually this is around week 4 of your cycle that you start to experience these PMS symptoms. You may experience some of that bloating and that water retention. You may not feel your best, but if your symptoms are severe, so we're not talking just kind of regular PMS symptoms, but severe to the point that they are debilitating, they're impacting you to go to work, there's something that's going on deeper that you need to speak to your physician about. There's a small percentage of women that have PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a clinical diagnosis with very severe symptoms. So if you're experiencing something that's very debilitating, please speak to your physician and have them assess if you have PMDD. Okay, now that we've talked about the phases of the cycle and the hormones that play a role in each phase, I think it'll be helpful to discuss energy changes so that you can be in sync with your body, understand it, and be empowered by your cycle changes instead of feeling like your body is working against you. Okay, in the follicular phase, remember, estrogen is our dominant hormone that gets higher as the phase continues. And while some women may experience some fatigue or slight tiredness during the menstruation part, that initial phase, that is actually where estrogen is lower than it is later in this follicular phase. The energies start to increase as the follicular phase continues, and that is due to the rise in estrogen. So you may notice during the follicular phase that you have the highest energy compared to, say, the luteal phase. This is where I would highly encourage you to start to be in tune with your body and energy levels. So during this phase, because of your higher energy typically that you'll have, you can truly optimize your schedule around getting more tasks done, pushing yourself more in your workouts, going out more with friends, organizing and prepping your food, complete that work project, maybe that you still have to do, and other important tasks in your life. Now, in the luteal phase, as I said earlier, progesterone is like our calming hormone. During the luteal phase, you may start to feel more calm, possibly more reserved rather than super social, and maybe feeling a little bit more tired or sleepier as your energy levels naturally decline a bit. So during this part of your cycle, you might want to, instead of going out and doing a lot and pushing yourself in your workouts, you might do something that's a little bit more easier on you. Maybe some yoga, maybe some stretching, maybe some walking. During the luteal phase, you're most likely not going to hit, a new PR. You could, but it's not as likely. You could also take this time of your cycle to really be reflective. So maybe journaling a little bit more, since you possibly maybe feel a little bit more reserved or calmed down. So you can kind of really take some time to do that. Maybe take an extra nap if you need it. You could also take some time, especially if you're feeling those PMS symptoms, to try to take care of your body. Maybe do an at-home spa night, candles lit. Just take care of yourself during this cycle. And, maybe you can do other things like reading a book that maybe you wanted to read, but you've been super busy, or maybe you've been just doing a bunch of stuff earlier on in the month. So just take this time to really take care of you and do what makes you feel best during this phase of your cycle. Once you understand these energy changes, you can really pay attention and not work against your body. Instead of just trying to like muscle your way through or critiquing yourself, you can take a step back and understand where you are in your cycle and how that impacts your energy and mood. It shifts you from the I should mentality to an I understand and accept this is what's happening in my body. Personally, for me, this has really empowered me, and I hope it starts to empower you. So if you haven't done this already, I would highly encourage you to start tracking your cycle, because it can really help to enlighten and help you to understand a little bit more and put what I'm talking about today into kind of practice. I said it before in this episode, but I am so impressed with what our bodies do as women, and I love God's design. Like, remember at the beginning of this when I was talking about like how we tend to hate our periods? I used to hate mine too. I don't obviously love the menstruating part, but I do have a deep respect for our cycles as women and understanding it as a signal of our health. I used to not, though. I used to not respect my cycle. I used to not understand it, especially as a signal of my health. And to give you some background in my own personal story with this, I had my cycle and I eventually lost my period. I lost it back probably like toward the very end of middle school or beginning of high school, somewhere in there, around that time period. And I was actually happy that I didn't have to deal with menstruation. I was so happy I didn't have to have my period. I dealt with not having my period for a little over 3 years. And then I went to a doctor because I was pretty young at this point. I wasn't a dietitian, so I didn't fully understand what was happening or what was going on. And so I went to a doctor and they put me on hormonal birth control. But again, I had no education around it. And as I said earlier, it's not a real period. I eventually got off of birth control. What I didn't know then, when I got on birth control, was that there was a reason I lost my period. And that was not talked about with me. The doctor did not educate me on why my period was gone. They told me to regulate it with hormonal birth control. And so I just got put on birth control. Again, there was no education around it, what it does to my body, what happened. This is where my passion in women's health and hormonal health comes into play, because I dealt with these hormonal issues that unfortunately were not assessed and addressed. After becoming a dietitian, I understand it. I have understand it for many years now. I've been a dietitian for about 7 years. I had dealt with hypothalamic amenorrhea, or HA, which I can go on in more depth with in another episode, but my hormones, including my thyroid hormones, were negatively impacted and I lost my period as a result. And so I had to rehab my nutrition and health back in order to have a regular cycle again. And yes, I got a regular cycle. I have a regular cycle. It's great. But this is exactly why I love helping women with their cycles too, and really feeling empowered by their cycles. Don't forget, girl, your cycle is your vital sign. It's great to have a period, and it's amazing to have it, know your body, and know that you're healthy. Aside from HA, there are other cycle related problems and conditions where your cycle can become irregular, like PCOS, estrogen dominance, irregular bleeding, among others. And that's something that I can go into as well in another episode. So if your cycle is irregular, there's something to it. I would love to work with you if you want support with your cycle. If you're not ready for one-on-one sessions, I am working on a menstrual cycle course. And if you want to get notified when it's released and get a special discount, sign up on my waitlist in the link in the description and show notes. Thank you for spending time with me today. I hope this episode helps empower you to understand your menstrual cycle more and help you to really lean into your fifth vital sign, to listen to your body. If this episode resonated with you, it would mean so much to me if you follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen to, and please leave a 5-star review, because it helps other women find this podcast that need it. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next episode of Rooted Radiance.